Welcome to an unlikely comparison video. Today we will be comparing a quintessential modified JDM car versus a quintessential modified German car, both from the same era. This is a 2003 Mazda RX-8, and we will be comparing it to a 2004 Porsche 911 Carrera. So before you cry foul and say the Porsche is a way more expensive and powerful car, hear me out on why I think this is a relevant comparison. Both cars are from the early 2000s era. Both have naturally aspirated engines, 6-speed manual transmissions. They drive the rear wheels only, and they have back seats. They can be used on a daily basis, although there are caveats to both, of course. Mostly this one being the finicky rotary engine and the 911 being basically everything else being potentially unreliable. But you get my point. These cars are actually much closer than you may think. And the way these two examples are modified are quintessentially JDM versus Euro. So let me go through the mod list on this RX-8. It's got a racing beat intake, headers mid-pipe, HKS Hi-power exhaust, HKS Hipermax S Coilovers, poly bushings and engine mounts and diff mounts, some Project Mu pads, Sparco bucket seat and steering wheel, and then we got the Wedssport TC105X wheels, 18 by 9.5 plus 35 all around. And then the exterior is quintessentially JDM, a feed style bumper and skirts, Seibon hood, and an APR wing. So specs on the car, this being a 2004 model, it is the facelifted model with the 1.3 liter rotary engine that now produces 238 brake horsepower. It's a rever, it'll rev out to 9,000 RPM, but there's not a whole lot of grunt low down. This is also around a 3,000 pound car, very similar to that 996 Carrera. With that out of the way, let's see how this thing drives on a canyon road. Such a ridiculous red line, 9,000 RPM. I love the sound of this little rotary. It's so unique, it's so buzzy. It has a high-pitched shriek at the top end. Love the throttle response. Not the first time I've driven an RX-8 on this road, and the throttle response is so sharp in this thing. And the steering fairly light in stock form, but because Kevin put on this smaller diameter Sparco wheel, it actually adds a little bit of weight. It makes it feel like it loads up a little bit more in the corners, which is a welcome addition. This is not a super light car at 3,000 pounds. It could do with another 30 horsepower, but it's still gonna feel a lot more accelerative than a contemporary NB Miata. There's your 9,000 red line. This engine really shines at the higher RPMs. It really does not like to go full throttle below around 5,000 or 6,000 RPM. Good high-speed stability here. Plenty of mid-corner grip. The suspension's pretty good. It is on the firmer side, I think, for daily driving, but still tolerable. And out here, it feels very sharp. The car responds quickly to my inputs. Love the RX-8, man, and I've really grown to appreciate the driving dynamics of this car. Of course, the RX-8 with its rotary engine is full of quirks if you actually own one. It's not the most owner-friendly car in the world if you don't know what you're doing. But hey, neither is that 996 generation 911 with its pesky IMS and potential bore scoring issues. But I have to say, the RX-8 just continues to impress me every time I get behind the wheel. And this one might just be the best one I've driven to date. The long wheelbase gives it a very sure-footed feeling in the corners. Loves to rev out. It's got a really slick shifting 6-speed manual, and the hydraulic steering rack is pretty good. It's got quite a bit of feedback. Now let's open this thing up one more time before we hop over into that 996. Intoxicating. I think that's the word I used the last time I drove an RX-8. The engine is truly intoxicating. Again, if it had another 30 horsepower, it'd be perfect. If only Mazda could find a way to bring the rotary engine back. I know at this point in 2022, it's virtually impossible, but I just can't stress enough how much I love the character of this little rotary. Now, with that being said, we are going to hop into the Porsche 996 Carrera and see if the best from Germany from the early 2000s can compete in terms of driving pleasure. All right, guys, we are now in the 2003 Porsche 996 Carrera. This is the base model 911, but the owner, Yo, has installed some really high quality, classy parts to improve the driving dynamics. So this car has the OEM aero kit, which is basically the GT3 bumpers, side skirts, and rear wing, which I really think freshens up the exterior of this car a lot. It's got the Recaro SPG seat, OEM Porsche T-Equipment roll bar, as well as the GT3 coilovers and lower control arms, which should add a nice amount of much needed negative camber. Since I used to own a 997.1 Carrera, I know all about the limitations of the stock suspension. We've also got the Apex EC7RS wheels, Nankang CR-S tires, PFC 08 brake pads, and Tubi style rear mufflers. In terms of the specs, 3.6 liter flat six naturally aspirated engine. It's the M96 engine code. In this car, it makes 315 horsepower, 273 foot-pounds of torque. Sends all that power to the rear wheels via a 6-speed manual transmission, and I believe since this is a base model, it does not have a limited slip differential. But for canyon driving, honestly, that does not matter because this thing has so much rear traction since it is a rear engine vehicle. This car also weighs around 3,000 pounds. It's got good old-fashioned hydraulic steering, so it should be a very interesting comparison, believe it or not, with that RX-8. So with that out of the way, let's see how this thing does. Second gear. Gotta love the howl of a naturally aspirated Porsche flat six. I think the harnesses back there are hitting the roll bar, so there's a little bit of extra noise, but we'll make do. This engine revs out happily to just over 7,000 RPM. It has quite tall gearing, so mostly I'll be in second and third gear here. There's that rear engine handling trait. When you start cornering hard in this thing, the front end gets very light in a way that's almost a little bit scary. It's not an easy car to drive quickly the first time you hop into it. It requires you to be very cognizant of the fact that almost all of the weight of this car is over the rear axle. When you start getting some side G-forces into those tires, the front end gets really light. It lifts up. You can feel the steering get light. It suddenly loses a bit of feedback, and the car does understeer. That's the thing with these older 911s. Before they improved the suspension geometry like they did with the 991 and 992, these old 911s, they are a tricky beast to drive quickly. Can't argue with that flat 6 engine. It's so flexible and yet still rev happy. Plenty of torque low down since it is a 3.6 liter, but it still rewards you for winding it out. It's no GT3 engine, but it gives you, I would say, 70 to 80% of the experience. So drop it down to second for this hairpin. Understeer into the corner, and then adjust the rear end sets coming out of the corner. You get plenty of corner exit traction. That's the name of the game with these 911s. Love this hydraulic steering rack, full of feedback, perfect weighting. The front end definitely feels sharper with the GT3 suspension and lower control arms. Honestly, perfect throttle response from this NA flat 6. So trail brake it in and get hard on the throttle coming out. That's how you drive one of these cars, at least in the canyons. On the track, it might be a different experience. Trail braking can upset the balance of the car a little bit at track speeds, but in the canyons, I like a little bit of trail braking into the corner just to get that nose to tuck in and neutralize some of that pesky understeer. Steering in this car, decidedly better than the steering in the RX-8. Shifter is decidedly worse. The RX-8 does have a very, very good shifter feel. This isn't bad, but it has a little bit of a more sloppy feel to it, I think. Throttle response goes to the RX-8, but not by a ton. This 996, while it does feel like it has a heavier flywheel, it also has a very direct throttle response, a one-to-one mapping between what you do with your right foot versus how the engine responds, which is always what you want. It's a pretty quick car. You can hustle it around a canyon road, no problem, as long as you're very careful with your throttle application. Totally different driving experience when attacking corners compared to that RX-8. In the RX-8, you just turn the steering wheel and the car responds, whereas in this thing you have to be patient. You have to plan your corner entry very precisely. Doesn't give you as much leeway as a front engine rear drive car. I'm gonna turn the AC back on here and summarize my thoughts. Both of these cars are so enjoyable to drive. Both of them give you that early 2000s vibe. Second gear. Listen to that. Again, the gearing's really tall. I wasn't even able to get to the top of third on that straightaway. So personally, I would like a shorter final drive, but it also makes sense for a car like this that has, you know, over 300 horsepower and it's designed for freeway cruising as well as the occasional track day. It makes sense why you'd want a little bit of a taller gear ratio. Honestly, drive both. Pick the one you want because you can't go wrong with either of these two cars. From a driving dynamics perspective, they're both top notch. The RX-8 gives you that quintessential JDM FR sports car feel, whereas this very German 996 Carrera gives you a more sort of solidly built driving experience, but it's still very fun in its own regard. Amazing engine, one of the best steering racks of all time, in my opinion. A good amount of power as well. This is no slow car, even by modern standards. If I had to take one of these two cars home, that older 911 feel when you turn into a corner, again, it's not really for me, if I'm being honest. I am a front engine rear wheel drive kind of guy. So now that I'm saying this out loud, maybe the RX-8 is more up my alley. That's nothing to take away from the 996 if this is your cup of tea. Thank you all for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Let me know what cars you'd like to see compared in the future, and I'll see you guys in the next one.